What is going on, everybody? Thought I would take some time, maybe celebrate what we have accomplished here this year on the Source Material Comics feed. Talk about some of the great shows and things that happened over the past year. Also kind of talk about what to expect in the future for the show as we are heading towards our 10-year anniversary of this show launching. Let's sit back, take stock of where we are at the end of 2023, and see what awaits us in 2024. So the first question that ChatGPT threw at me was, which episodes received the most engagement or positive feedback from our audience? Now, I'll mention this later on. We're a podcast with limited reach. That's probably the best way to put it. You know, it's very rare that we eclipse 30 listens for a podcast. So I went and took a look at the top 5 episodes for the past year on our show on the feed, and here's what we got. So going from 5 to 1, number 5 was Unspoken Issues, number 72, Superman, Doomsday, Hunter, Prey. And these listens are all by Spreaker, by the way. I'm not counting YouTube in there. I'm not counting Spotify. These are just straight Spreaker listens. So Superman, Doomsday, Hunter, Prey. I remember it was me, Chris Armstrong, and Evan Bevins talking about the origins of Doomsday. That was a fun book. It was a fun discussion. Number 4 was Source Material, number 329, Stan Lee Celebration / Marvel Snap. And I remember this one. Come away with 40 listens on this. Evan and I got together to celebrate Stan Lee and his accomplishments. And we also talked about the, at that time, fairly new mobile card game, Marvel Snap. There's a companion piece that went along with that. I remember we recorded both of them. It was another Source Material, tumultuous trio of Stan Lee tales. Didn't make the top 5, but I remember recording and talking about that with Evan. That's where I did the calculations for the speed of sound, because there was a panel of Ben Grimm whistling while he was on like this supersonic sled. Fun stuff. Number 3, Unspoken Issues number 74, which was our X-Men Collector's Edition. Dean and Derry and we got together and started talking about the Pizza Hut comics. These were the comics that you got with an order of pizza at Pizza Hut. We talked about all 4 issues there. That came away with 43 listens for the year. Unspoken Issues number 77 comes in at number 2. This was myself, Dean Compton, and his significant other, Emily, getting together and talking about Sandman Mystery Theater number 1 through 4. Yes, Vertigo fans, it came in as number 2 for the year. Walked away with 49 listens. And the number 1 relatively new podcast on the Source Material Comics feed, and that is Snap Material, The Guardian's Greatest Hits Preview. This was one of the very early episodes of Snap Material. It came away with 54 listens, and when looking over the stats for all year, Snap Material really grabbed a lot of people's attention. So more on that later, but yes, an episode of Snap Material, myself and Evan Bevins getting together talking about Marvel Snap, takes the top episode of the year. Next question was, were there any standout moments of interviews that garnered a significant attention or sparked discussions? Now, I'm not an interviewer. I've done it. I've interviewed creators before on my podcast, but I usually kind of stay away from that. That kind of doesn't apply here, especially I didn't do any interviews this year. But I will tell you, as far as standout moments, I kind of already mentioned it already. The inclusion of the new podcast Snap Material did give me the chance to combine podcasting and game playing and get to be creative as well. So that kind of stood out for me for the year, and I'm putting that against everything that happened. That's probably the biggest standout. It talks about standout moments or interviews. This next question kind of ties into that question as well. It says, what were the most memorable moments or favorite topics covered in your podcast this past year? There was a lot of content that we did. 106 episodes when you're counting Snap Material, you're counting AI Rights, you're counting Source Material, and you're also counting Unspoken Issues. That's 106 episodes total, and that's nothing to sneeze at. That's about 2 per week. And I imagine Snap Material's taken up probably a good portion of that, because we do about 4 or 5 episodes of Snap Material in a month. But yeah, 106 episodes. I've read a lot of comics over the year. A lot of comics. I think the most memorable for me, there was a project. It'll come up again here later on as we talk. I wanted to get another article onto the Unspoken Decade. I wrote an article, I think it was 2018. It was in regards to the Ultra Force cartoon, and I like to write. I do. Just time, it's unfortunately a matter of trying to devote the time to write something, do the research, write it up. I rather would make notes, do all the research, and then record myself talking about it. For some reason, that's easier for me to do that. But I wanted to get something else on there, and completing my nightmare project was tops for me this year. It was a triple threat. It was a podcast, a YouTube video or videos, and actually a written piece for the Unspoken Decade that I did all at once. And I'm pretty proud of it. I did some solo shots throughout the year as well. Those were fun. I talked about the first Star-Lord, which was Marvel Premiere number 4 for source material. The podcast was me experiencing it. Got some good feedback on that too, from a couple respected people. Also, Chakan, the Forever Man, a comic that had a video game created from it from the early 90s, one of the early Sega Genesis games. That was pretty fun because I read the comic, experienced it, and then watched a whole playthrough of the game. I'd say also talking to Mark about Not All Robots and the threat or promise that AI is bringing to the world. And as of this recording, it hasn't aired yet, but Mark and I always have a good discussion when it comes to Mark Russell books. That is not any different. If you get a chance, please tune in and listen because we hit on some pretty big topics. And AI being one of my most recent passions, trust me. If you're listening to this, most likely you've interacted with me already. I've somehow brought up artificial intelligence and how it's going to impact the world. It has impacted the way I'm doing podcasts. I'll talk about that here a little bit more. But yeah, conversations with Mark about topics that come up in comic books, always fun. I'll point to the Superblog Team Up as a highlight, thanks to Chris Bailey for always giving me the opportunity to participate in that with other great podcasters and blogsters out there. This year, we did an Avengers X-Men discussion. So that was the topics for everybody to kind of talk about. So I was just getting into learning about AI and ChatGPT. I fed the Marvel fandom pages into ChatGPT for Ultron and Nimrod, threw some questions out there to compare those two villains and used artificial intelligence to kind of, theorize or postulate what kind of music those two would listen to, who would win in a fight, what would their baby be like if they could have a baby. It was a lot of fun, but it kind of set me on this path that I'm at right now or it's just right at the beginning of this journey that I'm taking with realizing how much of a tool artificial intelligence is in order to help with the podcast. And this year, compared to other years, while the concept of what I'm trying to do is the same, normally I do a podcast, we pick a book, I'll read it, take notes, and then I would write a synopsis. I'd have a few talking points when we did the podcast, and we would record, and there we go. What I started doing now is I've been taking those notes, putting them into ChatGPT and telling it to summarize my notes in paragraph format and add a storytelling flair. As long as your notes are good, the synopsis that I've been reading, they've been great. Sometimes I might have to get in there and adjust it a little bit, but it's really helped on my synopsis. It's also helped in episode descriptions. This content that I'm putting out here right now has been influenced by ChatGPT and the questions that I'm answering. So I'm going to be using this a lot more in the future. That kind of leads into the evolution of the podcast. How's the podcast evolved in terms of content, formal, or style throughout the year? Source material has kind of morphed into a show that essentially features Mark and myself, or sometimes it's just me. Over the past year, out of 25 shows, 7 of those were solo, just by myself, while only one of those featured Chris Armstrong. That's where he and I got together and talked DC's New Frontier. The rest were with Mark. Unspoken Issues has been pretty split with Dean and Derry and myself, and then sometimes it's Chris and Evan and I getting together and doing a show. Matthew, Price, and Emily have come on, done some shows with us. always 90s centric, of course, with Unspoken Issues. Out of 31 shows total for Unspoken Issues, 10 of those were Marvel related, 6 were DC related, and 15 of those shows, about half, were actually devoted to other companies, such as Image and Dark Horse. I did introduce AI rights, which was fun. Usually it derived out of some kind of pivot and conversation on one of the other podcasts. The one I always point to is the Spectre as a Subway sandwich food inspector, essentially giving artificial intelligence, it was either ChatGPT or Claude, the prompt to come up with a comic concept of and how the plot would unravel for something. And specifically, I think we did one that was Buffy the Vampire Slayer versus Batman, but not just Batman, the Red Rain Batman. We had Boomerang and the super-powered Cell saga. And I want to touch on this real quick because I'm talking about that show. I've only got 3 episodes out there. And when I first started to do it, I was like, man, this is going to be a new show. This is going to be something that is going to be very frequent on my feed. And I stopped after the 3rd episode. Now, I was putting a lot into it. I was creating artificial intelligence promotions. The theme song was strictly created via artificial intelligence. As much as I champion the use of artificial intelligence AI tools, I started to see some of my peers, some of my friends that are on the network, really have an equal and opposite reaction. It impacts creators a lot. It impacts them quite a bit. AI image generation took a massive leap this year with DALL-E 3. And I've got a couple artist friends. I mean, I read comics and I respect the creators behind them. You know, Benjamin J. Colon has been a frequent podcast guest on these shows. And I know that this innovation is going to affect them. Many of the opinions right now see what I was doing with AI rights as low effort. And there's an argument to be had there. Yeah, it could be low effort, but it provided content and it was fun. But some people may be like, well, hey, I don't want to give AI the spotlight. I respect that opinion. So will there be more AI rights? Probably. I got to feel a little more confident that what I'm doing, number one, is entertaining, which I believe it is, but other people may have differing ideas. Notice that AI rights was not in the top 5, but I feel that there's something there. So anyway, that's enough on that. Let's talk about Snap Material. Snap Material started in March of 2023. Myself and Evan Bevins getting together. We were putting about 4 to 5 shows out all in one week, once per month. So there was always a Snap Material week that the source material feed was dedicated to. And those were fun. That's definitely going to continue. Evan and I have actually plans to record here in a few days. And clearly other people have enjoyed what we put out there. Was there any significant changes in the way you approached topics or engaged with your audience? Not really. On source material, Mark was usually grabbing some stuff from Ollie's or Barnes & Noble, and we would maybe record 3 books at a time with the same company or similar interest or similar theme. You know, you'll notice that one trilogy of books was just about metal-related properties, Slayer, Iron Maiden. Then we might have 3 books that are DC-related, and then the other 3 are Marvel-related. Usually those episodes tend to be around 30 to 45 minutes. And the reason for that is Mark and I record those all in one shot. We'll sit down once a month, and we're going to record our discussion on 3 books. That works out really well. I mean, especially when you're talking 3 episodes for the price of 1 recording. I'll never complain about that because that gives me content for most of the month. And when you're only trying at least to get 1 show out per week, it takes a lot off my table. So I would say that's kind of how we've been approaching recording at least. And, you know, as for topics, it's pretty simple. Like I said, Dean's running the UI show a lot of times. When Chris and Evan and I get together, you know, we're either talking about a poll that we put up, something that's kind of tickling our fancy at that point in time. And Evan and I on Snap Material, the content's pretty easy to come up with. We have a bit of a format over there, which, you know, I don't know if it's evolved any, but, you know, we'll talk about the last season. We'll talk about the upcoming season. We'll have an online battle, and then we'll have a top 5 and talk about what we've unlocked and some of the trends that we've seen. So Those formats are probably want to stick around for a little bit. They've been doing us well all right so far. Did you experiment with new segments or themes that particularly resonated with your listeners? And I'll go right back to Snap Material, that being the top show of the year. So yeah, that show has seemed to gain some traction. Sometimes I do worry about the different content on the feed, and I wonder if it should have its own feed. Like, should source material be separate from a feed that you can subscribe to for Snap Material and a separate feed for Unspoken Issues? Getting 3 separate feeds is not a hard thing to do, but I'm not the controller of the network. And I also worry about content for the feed. If Evan and I did Snap Material on a separate feed, that feed would get updated once a month and then for 5 days in a month, and then you wouldn't hear anything on that feed again for another month. It's kind of hard to keep listeners engaged. Same thing with Unspoken Issues. Twice a month there, along with source material. Twice a month there. There'd be a gap in between episodes. And that's kind of the reason why I have them all on the feed right now, is because they can at least get some content once a week, comic book related, for source material. Hey, I might not be into Snap, but I'll stay subscribed because I enjoy Unspoken Issues. And if I want to separating those feeds out, trust me, it would gnaw at me that there's a week going by where there's no content. And I'd feel like I need to fill that gap with something for the listeners. And when that would happen, well, I'd be looking at overextending myself for sure, because I would want to do an extra episode here and there to fill that silence. And I can't do it. I just can't do it. Now, if I had other contributors, other people that'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, hey, I'll do a show Snap Material related. I'll do a show Unspoken Issues related. Well, then, okay. As long as I'm not involved, you can do all the editing, get the show over to me, then boom, we're in business. But it's something to think about in the future. All right, what kind of feedback did you receive from your audience about specific episodes or themes? Look, I'm a small podcaster here. You heard my listen run down there at the beginning. We're not pulling in thousands of listens, so we're not getting a whole lot of audience feedback, and I'm fine with that. I've been doing this for 9 years. As long as this is a hobby and it's a way of having a good time with friends that enjoy the same things that I do, I'll continue to produce content all the time. So I'm not really too consumed by how many people are listening to my show. Do I see those bumps and go, oh, wow, look at that? Yeah, that gets exciting when you start to see a increase in listens for some specific episode and you're wondering why that happened and can the trend continue? Yes, that's exciting. And yeah, I would love to have more listener engagement. I'd love to have more people reaching out and saying, hey, I enjoyed that episode, or what do you think about this? Or I really didn't like this part about. That's all fun. And I get some of that from other people that I talk to. Most of the people that I talk to say that they enjoy what they're listening to. Were there any episodes that generated a lot of discussion or prompted your audience to share their own stories and experiences? So see the previous question, but I've always tried to do that with Spotify, because Spotify for podcasters gives you the opportunity to ask polls and questions on specific episodes. I get some poll results in, and trust me, it's very little. And usually it's probably Evan Bevins chiming in with something, or one of his friends. Open-ended questions, though, rarely get an answer. So it's kind of hard to get the feedback, at least with the little bit of listenership that I have. How has hosting these podcasts impacted you personally? So that's a great question right there. So like I said, I'm going on 10 years of this. I have noticed that I do feel really comfortable speaking in front of other groups than what I had previously experienced. Sometimes when talking with other people, especially when it comes to like explaining those things that I want to convey passionately, podcast guy definitely comes out. I can tell. Like I'm very deliberate. I emphasize my words. I could still easily get tongue-tied. I do it on here all the time. You'll hear me, all that stuff. But there is a marked difference in talking personally to somebody. I've learned to kind of slow myself down. Again, not a cure-all because I still do it, but I will slow myself down in order to make sure that the words that come out of my mouth have the most impact. What were the challenges and successes you experienced throughout the year? So we're going to start with successes first. Nightmare, already talked about it. That was a big one. I accomplished something there that I've been wanting to do for years now, actually. Ever since I had done that one in 2018, the follow-up to that following year, I was like, I want to do something on Nightmare. This is, by the way, Rob Liefeld's Nightmare with a K. It's a 5-issue series. Came out in 95, 5, I want to say. And I wanted to write that article back then. So normal source material content is myself reading over the issues, and unspoken issues as well, but reading over the issues and then talking about all 5 issues all at once. This time I did that. However, I took each issue that I talked about and created a video for it, which I'm pretty proud of. You can see the comic as I'm talking about it on YouTube, and that's the world. It's a world of difference compared to podcasts and YouTube. When you can see what somebody's talking about, I mean, that's why video killed the radio star, you know? So nightmare number 1 for sure. I got to this point, as I mentioned, recording with Mark, where throughout the year, I would have episodes in the can way early. And I consider this a success because there would be points where I could edit these episodes and have them ready and uploaded almost like 2 to 3 months in advance, and I don't have to do anything other than concentrate on possible other shows that I'm going to do, not for my feed, but for the network. Hanging out with Mark on TV Party Tonight, we went through and finished recently our discussion of From the Corner to the Deuce, a project that focused on David Simon related shows. We finished that up, and I attribute the fact that I had a lot of free time because my podcasts were ready to go. So that was nice. And staying a strict 1 episode per week, aside from snap material, that allowed me to spend some time with my family and do stuff that I wanted to do. I wanted to play some video games. Okay, you got plenty of time because you don't have to edit anything. It's already done. It's already uploaded. Now, as for challenges, staying motivated kind of ties in with actually the success of having everything done ahead of time. What would happen is I would have everything done ahead of time. I have all this free time. I like watching movies with my kids. 8:30's rolling around. I can't do it because I've got to record a podcast again. So getting and staying motivated for creating content, it got, that was a challenge. I like spending time with my friends, but man, boy, would I love to watch another episode of Lost. Did your perspective or understanding of any particular topic change as a result of discussions on your podcast? And that can happen quite frequently. Some of the things that stood out to me, and I bring this up a lot on Unspoken Issues and sometimes on source material, but I'm a pretty sheltered guy. I'm an introvert, like to stay in my basement, don't like to go out very much. Kids will joke with me because they could see on Life 360 I haven't left the house in a week. There were points where I'm working from home, I didn't leave, and I've got in my car and thought, man, I haven't drove in such a long time. Why, did I forget anything? It isn't normally that bad, but with being as introverted as I am, don't get out much, but reading some of these stories, they open my eyes to a lot of things. Recently, on the episode that I did with Dean and Derry of the Marvel Holiday Special from 1996, I never knew the true story of Hanukkah. I've never known what the actual story of Hanukkah was. And it took reading that for me to learn something that I hadn't learned before. I knew that Hanukkah's been a thing, just trust me. I just never had the chance to sit down and read anything about it. To recall specifically from source material, a lot of times Mark and I sitting down and talking about some of the stuff that happens in that book or the books, they're usually great discussions. There's an episode on Gwar Orgasmageddon, probably about, 2 weeks before Mark and I record this podcast. I find that there is a documentary, I think it was on Amazon Prime, and it was about Gwar. Now, my preconceptions of Gwar were that it was a band that was like horribly satanic and over the top, bloody and gory. Like Gwar was something where I was like, man, I don't even want to listen to this stuff because I'm afraid of what would happen to me. I wouldn't want to go to one of their concerts. People were getting killed on stage. And then I watched the documentary. It was eye-opening. This band was formed out of a love of comic books and some of the goofy stuff that happens. They would create these art projects. And then somebody was like, well, let's use this art project as part of our band. And then the band just evolved from there. There were Gwar comics, the Gwar Slave Funnies, I think is what it was called, or Follies, I can't remember. And then it was reading the book and how silly, over the top, granted, gore and sexual references all over the place, but it was enjoyable. The documentary was great. I learned a lot there. I respect the band for what they've been through, who they've lost, the effort that they put on stage. So, yeah, I mean, that's pretty specific, but I came out of that episode thinking, man, Gwar, that's crazy. Why? Their reputation preceded them. All right, personal favorites. So I'm going to follow this up with some personal favorites here of podcasts that I did throughout the year, and, love any podcast that I usually get a chance to do, to sit down and talk with a guest, co-host, whatever. Always an honor. Let's start out with my solo podcasts. Easy. Nightmare. Already mentioned it. Unspoken Issues article for the Unspoken Decade. Unspoken Issues video for the source material YouTube page, and an Unspoken Issues podcast. So check that out. With Chris Armstrong, I'll tell you that our discussion on Supreme versus Bloodstrike, Chef's Kiss, I am just telling you this because it's one of my favorites, because it is the opportunity for both he and I to realize how impactful the Image movement was when we were used to DC and Marvel and the Comics Code approved content that they had in their comic books. Supreme versus Bloodstrike opened both of our eyes when we were kids, and then our Unspoken Issues episode gave us the chance to revel in all of its blood-soaked glory. Now, with Evan Bevins, my personal favorites throughout the year are our top fives for Snap material, because it's a chance for us to come up with something off the top of our head that's Marvel Snap related, but also in line with some kind of a theme. Top 5 worst locations. This most recent one that we did was the top 5 Marvel Snap cards that best represent the Christmas spirit. And he and I do our top 5s independently, and it's fun to see how sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't. But it's one of my favorite segments on Snap material to do. And I love lists. So what about when I do a podcast with Chris Armstrong and Evan Bevins? We had a few of those. Unspoken Issues, once again, we talked about the Ultraverse launch titles this year. 30-year anniversary. When we did our discussion about the Ultraverse launch titles, we also followed that up with a issue of Exiles, I think, that we talked about. But that was a fun discussion. Ultraverse is not like a blind spot for me, but it's one of the weaker spots when it comes to understanding, when it comes to knowing what happened in that universe. This was the ground floor, and it was fun to talk with those guys about it. Now, Dean and Derry, we have put out a lot of content on Unspoken Issues this past year, but my absolute favorite was the episode of the Super 7. It was a DC story that took place across 2 annuals, Elseworlds annuals, and we talk about some of the magnificent moments that happen in that issue. It's just fantastic. What a great story. And then, of course, Mark Radulich, the guy that's been with me the longest when it comes to talking comics. I want to point towards Not All Robots. Again, that hasn't aired yet, and it's almost kind of like a shameless plug for upcoming content, but check that out, because it is a great conversation on not just artificial intelligence and AI and the robots are taking over. It's not that all the time. There's a good portion where I get to go off because it was recorded just as Sam Altman had gotten fired from OpenAI, which he ended up going back within the following week. But it's also a discussion on, men and their roles with their family and their roles in society. All right, looking forward. Do you anticipate any changes or improvements to the podcast based on lessons learned in the past year? I've already said it. I'll say it again. I'm going to be making use of AI a lot more. ChatGPT, Claude, anything else I can get my hands on. It's become a tool that has helped me tremendously while saving some time as well. I recently purchased a subscription to Descript, but you can upload your podcast episodes. They will transcribe them for you. You can make edits to the transcription, which then also makes edits to the audio that it's based off of. So I can clear out things in a flash. No more sitting and listening to the whole podcast in order to remove the uhs and the ums. I can do that pretty quickly with that. But it also gives me the opportunity to have a transcription of a show, which recently I had figured out I can take the transcription, throw it into Claude, and tell Claude to give me a description, a 4-paragraph summary to promote the podcast. Use that as the description on Spreaker. Theme songs are going to change because, like I said, we have tools now that allow us to create music AI tools that allow us to create music that's not copyrighted anymore. And I can have lyrics. So get ready for the Unspoken Issues theme song, because it will be a song that people sing. Just got to come up with the lyrics now. ChatGPT will help me with that. Notable trends or patterns. Were there recurring themes, trends, or topics that emerged across multiple episodes? Not really. I sprinkled some video game related content this past year in there, both on Unspoken Issues and source material. You may be able to find a video game related episode. I know I did one on Sonic the Hedgehog, the comic that came with the game. There is an Earthworm Jim comic that I read from the 90s. I have it recorded. I just haven't had a chance to put it onto the network yet. I'll probably have to get that done next year. Were there any patterns in audience engagement or responses that you found interesting or noteworthy? So really, I just referred to the stats, the Spreaker stats on this. 8 of our top 10 episodes for the year are Unspoken Issues episodes. So the 90s are starting to land in that sweet, nostalgic spot for people. So I think that's why. There's also the Unspoken Decade Machine that continues to grow followers, where sometimes we share our content over there, may garner some listens. The other 2 of the top 10 are Snap material related. So there appears to be a audience for the mobile card game, Marvel Snap. So I'm going to have to look to breathing life into source material this year, get it into the top 10 by the end of 2024 somehow. I took a look at Spreaker geolocation for the year, and it shows, I can tell the guys that are part of this podcast who listen to the podcast as well, Mark, Evan, and Chris all download episodes from the network. So I assume they're subscribed. I appreciate that, guys. We did get some listens over in Oklahoma City, and I feel that that's right near Speeding Bullet Comics. Thank you, Matthew Price. So what's my plans for the upcoming year regarding the source material comics feed? We're celebrating 10 years. That's happening in September. So I thought that this year, ramping up to that 10th year anniversary, I would like to do some podcasts with everyone that I've done podcasts with in the past 10 years as a celebration. So we could go back to Golden Age Dave. We could find Tim Browning. We could find Josh Calandros. I'd have to reach out to every single one of them and see if they want to do a show. I want to, because it's a list, folks. I mean, not only do we have the regulars that have been here all year, Ronnie Adams hasn't been on this podcast for a while. Plenty of episodes in the archives with him. So that's number one. There's also other people that I've wanted to have on here for a long time. Some guys over at Kapow, I'd love to have them on here. Matt Cooper. I'd love to discuss Batman with that guy. Yeah, Matt Cooper, I know you don't know who he is, but I don't know. Might reach out to him. Part of the House of Gozer podcast, by the way. It's going to take some planning. And yeah, I may look into separating the content next. Maybe. I don't know how well that's going to go over with the heads of the network. Will creating different feeds be a problem? It might. I don't know. If you enjoy what you've listened to, absolutely let somebody know. Tell them about it. That's how we get the word out. Hopefully, you might find somebody that enjoys the podcast as well. And hey, look at that. You've got a new topic to talk about. Check us out on Source Matt Cast on X, formerly known as Twitter. We have the Source Material Comics Facebook page. Should be able to find that pretty easily. The Unspoken Issues Facebook page as well. We got polls that show up on there. I throw polls on the Source Matt Cast feed on Twitter. So we always love to see people interact with the polls. And of course, with Snap Material, Evan runs the Snap Material Twitter. So you can check us out over there as well. Upcoming on the show after this, like I said, you've got Not All Robots after that. It's interesting because I don't have a whole lot recorded and in the can for next year. We got Not All Robots that's hitting January 1st. And after that, I've got one episode that I will be airing where Dean, Derry, and myself just recently spoke about Jack Kirby's Fourth World. It came out in 1997, issue number 20, which was the final issue. Other than that, that's it. I mean, we have some on the agenda that's yet to be recorded. So keep an eye out, of course, on this feed. Check out the YouTube as well, the W2Mnet YouTube. You should be able to easily find all of our content there, all of the great other shows that are on this network. Watch out for that. But I want to finish up by saying thank you to the W2M network for hosting us and allowing us to do another year full of comic book related content. It's my absolute pleasure to talk about comic books that I've read. I want to also thank all the great co-hosts and guests that I've had on and talked with over the past year. You guys have helped out a ton. I've already mentioned some of your names. And if I forgot anybody, folks, I appreciate them immensely. And to all of you out there in podcast land listening, those that are on the Unspoken Issues Facebook page, those that interact on the source material Twitter, the silent ones that quietly enjoy the content that we put out there, I humbly thank you and look forward to an outstanding 2024. Have a good one. Bye-bye.